What is the most unexplainable paranormal experience that has ever happened to you? So 2 years ago, I woke up around 1 a.m. thinking to myself, I can never go home again. It was the most intense sense of homesickness that I've ever experienced. Full of panic and regret, I tried to calm myself down. Logically, of course I could. My parents, they lived just a couple of hours away, still in my childhood home. I had fought hard to get away from the suburb that I grew up in. So why this sudden, intense longing? Then the next day, I get a call that my dad had been hospitalized during the night and was in the ICU. He didn't make it out, and while the house is still there, it's not home anymore. Next story. When I was in high school, the days before cell phones were common, my friends were to come over and pick me up from my house one night. We made plans at school for them to pick me up at 7 p.m. At 6, my parents said I had to come with them to do something, and I totally forgot to call my friends and tell them. They came to my house at 7 p.m. and called the house phone. No one answered. There was 4 of them in the car. They all told us the exact same story. They said they were about to pull out of my driveway, but they saw someone peek through the blinds from the bedroom on the top floor right. That was my room. So they assumed that I was effing around. 5 more times they said that someone would peek through the blinds, and a couple of them said they even saw the person's eyes. Then we got home at probably 7:10, 7:15, and they were still on our driveway. One of my friends came over and said they thought I was messing with them. Then they asked me, "So who's staying in your room?" I told them that no one is. So then they asked, "Who's home at your house right now?" Again, I told them no one. Their stone-cold faces then told me what they had seen repeatedly over the last 15 minutes. At first, we all thought there was a burglar in the house or something, so we called the cops. They came over and inspected the house. There were 0 signs of break-in. Nothing was touched and nothing was stolen. Our house had an alarm in it, so there was no way someone could have come in the house without setting off the alarm. My family, my friends, and the cop all kind of stood around for a few minutes trying to make sense of the situation, but my friends swore up and down, and still do, that they couldn't have imagined what they saw. All 4 of them saw the same things, and it wasn't particularly a dark night, so their eyes wouldn't be playing tricks on them. To this day, none of us can make sense of the situation. Next story. When I was about 12 and started getting left alone at home, something used to shush me. I'd be pouring cereal, singing along to the TV, and suddenly, shh. First time it happened, I absolutely crapped myself and didn't say a word until someone came home. I didn't tell anyone because I didn't think anyone would believe me. I'd even started to convince myself it was just my imagination, but then it would happen again. I think it happened about 5 or 6 times. One Saturday morning, I was in my top bunk, the beds were super noisy, and the slightest of moves would result in them creaking. Shh! I thought it was my younger sister, so I decided to annoy her further. I started rocking about in my bunk, making as much noise as I possibly could, and suddenly, even more loudly, shh! I chuckled, still thinking it was my sister, and then she whispered nervously from below, "Was that you? The shushing, was that you?" Then I popped my head down and I said, "No, it was you." She looked terrified. Her eyes welled up with tears, and she said, "No, it wasn't." And she ran out of the room crying and wouldn't come back in for a long time. I realized it must have been the shushy ghost and was overcome with relief that I wasn't crazy because someone else had actually bloody heard it. Haven't heard it since though, and I'm always kind of waiting. The reason this ghost hasn't come back is because that ghost made a little girl cry. How could you, ghost? All right, there are boundaries. Remember in Better Call Saul when he made an old lady cry? I don't care who Saul has resulted in the death of, okay? You don't make old people cry, and you don't make young little girls cry, okay? Bad ghost. Next story. So, a few months after my uncle took his own life, I had a dream where he was talking to me on the phone. In the dream, he was telling me to tell his daughters that he loved them, and that he missed them a lot, but he talked like he was away in the military rather than dead. I also kept hearing weird clicking in the background. When I woke up, I mentioned everything to my mom, and she told me that when he was in the Navy, he did Morse code. No one had ever told me that before, or even mentioned it since I was alive, so it was weird that I remembered that part of the dream so clearly, and it made enough of an impression to mention to my mom. Next story. A few weeks ago, I was sitting at my desk in my university room. We think our flat's haunted because weird stuff happens every so often. Things disappear, there's noises when nobody's in, stuff like that. When suddenly, though, I get a sharp pain in my leg, as if I had been stabbed. I look down and there's nothing there, and absolutely nothing that could have caused it, so I carry on with my work. Next time I look down, there's a trail of blood going from just above my ankle and trickling down my foot. No explanation. I cleaned off the blood and bandaged it up, and it's healing now, but I still have no idea how I got the wound. It literally sprung from nowhere. Edit. I have a low platelet count. I had blood tests done as recommended, no varicose vein rupture thankfully, and that's why I bleed so much. Never found out what caused that wound though, but never lost the uneasy feeling about the flat. Strange things happen there. But I've moved out now, so hopefully the ghost has stayed put. Next story. Nothing too crazy, but camping in the desert in Utah. I was a wilderness guide and lived out of my trunk, so camped nearly every night. So totally used to weird noises, twigs cracking, whatever. But one night it was extremely calm and quiet, just a weird vibe in the air. A couple of friends and I were on BLM land in Utah near Moab, and we had just put out the fire and laid our airbags out. Just as I was starting to fade out, something grabbed me by my wrists and jerked my arm straight up into the air. I sat up immediately and two of my friends bolted up at the same time. We all had it happen to us, and we couldn't explain it. Nothing else happened, but it still makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up when I think about it. Next story. A few years ago, my sister was married to a soldier in the British Army, and he was stationed in Germany. We all visited her, and she knew I was interested in history, so for a day out, we visited Belsen-Bergen, the former Nazi concentration camp. As we were walking around, my sister was pushing the pram with my nephew in it. He was 1 or 2 years old at the time. And the thing about Belsen-Bergen is that after the war, it was burnt to the ground, so it's more or less blank fields. As we walked, we passed a tree when my nephew asked my sister who the kids were behind us. We all turned around and no one was there. My sister asked which kids, and she replied, "The ones in the pajamas." Yet again, no kids were anywhere to be seen. We all knew for a fact that he had no idea what country he was in, yet alone knew about the horrible events which occurred at that camp. Next story. I've had this happen around 3 times in my life, and it's always the same. Once, when I was a child, I was sound asleep. Maybe I was dreaming, I can't remember, but whatever was going on in my head stopped, and all I saw were 2 brightly lit circles about eye width apart. It jarred me awake, and when I woke up, my little sister was standing nearest to my bed staring at me. Somehow, I had sensed that she was staring at me. I later reasoned that my eyes had opened at some point and I didn't realize it, and I actually saw her staring at me subconsciously. But then, it happened about 2 years ago. I was laying in bed, and I remember I was actually dreaming about something, and it was like all the noise and action of my dream just dropped around me, and it was nothing but blackness, and all I saw were 2 brightly colored circles about eye width apart. Again, it jarred me awake, and when I opened my eyes, my wife was looking at me. She said I had made a throaty noise in my sleep, so she had been staring for about 10 seconds to make sure I was breathing, but she assured me I never opened my eyes as best she could tell. And then happened again about 3 to 4 months ago. My cat was staring at me this time. Next story. I was in basic training at Fort Knox, and we were on a very long road march when out of nowhere this beautiful yellow lab with no collar that looked exactly like my dog at home comes up to me and walks beside me of all people for a few minutes before running back into the woods. This was a big boost to me because you needed to finish the march as one of the requirements to graduate, and I was dragging ass due to the stress fractures in my feet. I was able to finish, and we earned some phone time to call home where my mom informed me that they had to put my dog down. She was sick before I left, and they were hoping she could hold on another week, but she just got too bad. When the dog came up to me, it was literally out of nowhere. There wasn't any houses around for miles. One of the things her and I loved to do was go on runs together. So I like to think that was her coming up to me to say goodbye. Next story. My family and I had just rented this beautiful historic house that was built around the Underground Railroad era. It had small hideouts and doors where slaves would hide out in. As soon as we moved in, we got uncomfortable vibes from it. We'd hear footsteps coming from the upstairs when everyone was downstairs. The TV would turn off and on by itself, and doors would open and close by themselves. We eventually accepted the fact that we had a ghost, and it seemed harmless, so we called her Claudia. Each of my family members had at least seen Claudia once. She was a tall, dark figure who would move fast. Most of the hauntings would come from my bedroom. It was always cold and had an unpleasant smell. My little brother began sleepwalking too and would have terrible nightmares. One night became the final straw for my family and our relationship with Claudia. My sister and I were away at our friends while my parents and brothers were at home. The whole house was asleep when my dad woke up from screaming coming from my bedroom. When he ran out past the living room where my little brother likes to sleep because of his sleepwalking, he noticed that my brother wasn't there. So he ran upstairs where he met my older brother who had heard the screaming as well. And then they both saw the bedroom door was shut, and then they realized that it was my little brother screaming in my room. They both went to open the door, but it was like something was blocking it. So finally my dad busted down the door, and as the door flew open, a black shadow ran right past him and my brother. He then entered my room that was so cold that he could see his own breath. He looked over at my little brother who was laying on my bed and covered in sweat and tears and started yelling his name to wake him up. But my little sibling just pointed, still asleep at the corner of the room, and started yelling, "Get her, Daddy, get her!" My dad looked over but saw nothing but pitch black, and that was enough for him. He quickly grabbed my brother, who was as stiff as a board, and ran into the hall out of there. When my brother woke up the next day, he had no memory of what had happened that night, and still doesn't remember when he talks about it almost 5 years later. We moved out of that house a few weeks after the incident, and my brother stopped sleepwalking as soon as we did. We've heard a few other stories from the people who currently own the house, but nothing quite as terrifying as what happened to my brother or my dad. The house has a great history behind it, but it was too creepy for my family. Next story. When I was younger and dumber, I was on a road trip the summer after my freshman year in college. I had been driving for maybe 5 or 6 hours straight without wearing my seatbelt. I then had a sudden urge to buckle my seatbelt. Then, less than 2 minutes later, a driver crossed the center lane, clipped my car, causing a massive accident. My car rolled over and I walked away with bruises and scratches, but I'm certain if I hadn't followed that urge, I wouldn't be here today. Still can't explain why or how that happened. Next story. When I was 15, my family went for a trip to a hill station named Shimla in India. We booked a suite in a hotel, which the master bedroom had a glass platform of size 8 by 8 feet, striking about 2 feet outside the room over the valleys, which were hundreds of feet below us. So, being an adventurous kid, I decided to sleep on that platform overlooking the hills and valleys while my dad slept on the bed and my mother and sister in the other bedroom. So, at around 1:30 in the morning, I was sleeping on my side facing the glass, which was about 3 inches from my face. Suddenly, my eyes opened, and I saw a woman looking at me intently from outside the glass. I still remember clearly her face was totally pale and her eyes dark with black hair and some dark cloth on the body. I can only explain her gaze of a lion before he jumps in to kill his prey, and it took me 3 to 4 seconds to realize where I am and that this is not some human looking through a window, but some entity floating outside my room. I shouted as loud as I could and pushed myself back so hard from the glass that I ended up hitting the other end of the room by force. My dad woke up and turned on all the lights, but there was no one to be seen now. That was the last time I ever slept with my window shades open in my life. It's been 8 years since the incident, but those eyes terrify me to this day. Edit. It was not sleep paralysis. I used to have 2 recurring scary dreams since I was 4 to 5 years old, which continued until I was 9 to 10. I have had sleep paralysis for a long time in recent years as well, so I know it was something outside of my mind. Next story. I live in northern Georgia in the United States. Behind our house, there is a dense forest for about 60 miles. One summer, I was walking along this river for a few hours that goes deeper into the woods, and I was about to cross the river at a shallow part when I heard this loud whistle about 40 meters to the right of where I would end up after I crossed the water. I've never seen or heard any sign of anyone here before. I whistled back. After about 30 seconds, I heard it again, but from behind me. At this point, I was confused. Then I can smell this terrible stench. It was so pungent, I started gagging. I stopped in the center of the river, and then that's when I saw it. A large, hairy, bipedal creature walking through a clearing about 15 meters from me. It looked at me, and it looked shocked, and the hair on its shoulders stood up. It backed up quickly, then turned around and sprinted. I've only told my dad about this, and he told me that he had seen them before and to not tell anyone else about them. I never believed in Sasquatch or anything like that before that day, but there was no other explanation for what I saw. Narrator's commentary. Okay, so I'm sure that OP experienced this, but that's not what I want to talk about. They live in Georgia in the southern United States, and they said something was 40 meters to the right of them. And then they said, I live in northern Georgia, United States. Americans don't do that. We just say our state and expect the rest of the world to know what that is. Something is a little off here about OP. I bet they don't even call it soccer. This requires further investigation. This is a very big issue. Anyway, next story. My family has always had something around in every house that we've lived in. It's hard to choose just one story, so I'll choose the most recent. So this house I'm currently in we've had some occurrences. Our beds would shake like a mini earthquake. My dad said he saw a predator camouflage outline in the trees watching us while checking what my dog was barking at, and we've had them choke us in the night. That's what happened to me most recently. Continuing, my sister used to crash in our living room when visiting from school. At this time, I was unemployed and stayed up until 4 a.m. every day playing video games. One night, I heard a loud gurgling sound, so I went to check it out with my dog, and my sister had tears in her eyes. She looks at me and points at the light, so I flick the switch and she sits up, gasping for air. And I asked her what was wrong, and she didn't say a thing. She finally asked if she could use my bed, and I let her solely for me being able to use the larger living room television for myself. Then, a few months later, I took a nap on the same couch at around 7, but woke up somewhere around 15 minutes later to see two glowing circles, eyes red around the edges, yellow in the middle, staring at me. Then I feel something pull me to the armrest, not fully, but enough to realize I'm in serious unexplainable crap, and I could not speak, let alone scream for help. My right arm was lifted slightly like it was putting me in a damn supernatural sleeper hold, but I had my phone in my left pocket and dialed the same sister's number. I hear her voice come through, so I start flicking the phone, tapping it until I see the hallway light turn on. She runs over and sees me tearing up like her and screams "Stop!" at the top of her lungs, and I finally could breathe. We haven't slept in that room since, but I'm still interested in knowing why and what was choking us. Next story. I just started working in a lab in August. Since I started, my coworkers have told me about all sorts of paranormal activity that has happened in the lab. I listened to their stories, but never put much stock into them. Then one day, about 3 months into the job, I was late setting up a specimen and ended up staying behind while everyone else left. The hood I was using is in a corner, and I couldn't really see anything except what was right in front of me without turning my chair. Then, out of nowhere, I heard and felt footsteps rushing towards me. The lab is on the 3rd floor of a 4-story building, and the rest of the building is completely unoccupied, but a gust blew past me. I turned to look, and there was nothing and nobody there. Next story. My father said that he's frequently seen a woman in a white dress at the top of our stairs, where the bedrooms are, between 2 to 4 in the morning. During that time, if I choose to go to the bathroom, I have this incredibly unsettling feeling like I shouldn't be out in the hallway for any reason. My boyfriend and I have also seen our 7-month-old son looking up the stairs, watching someone move around. There hasn't been anything too terribly or too truly scary, but it's definitely odd. Next story. I hold this story responsible for my continuing fascination with the unsolved and unexplained. It has become a part of the culture of our family. Growing up, I can recall many family get-togethers going late into the night, retelling different accounts, discussing possibilities. Since then, I've carried on the tradition as well, in telling my friends. It's a story that's meant to be told at nighttime, a standing story. At least my father and I can never sit while telling it. We'll never know what really happened that night, nor will my father, grandmother, or anyone in Wall Township, New Jersey for that matter. It's been over 2 decades since it has happened, and I feel a desire, a responsibility even, to write it and share this story with the hopes that others will appreciate it as much as my family, friends, and I have. So, I wasn't born yet. It's the summer of 1987 in Wall Township, New Jersey, my father's high school graduation night. He is out with friends celebrating. At home is my grandma and her young daughter, Jen. They live on a corner lot in a small ranch in a quiet suburban neighborhood along with their dog, Brandy, who is outside in a backyard pen that is located on the right side of the house. My grandma decided to drop something off at a friend's house, which was just a few minutes away, and leaves Jen at the house for a short time. While alone, Jen is in her room on the left side of the house when the first strange occurrence of the evening happens, the crunching of leaves outside her bedroom window. She knows that Brandy is in her pen and that this is no animal out there. This is distinctly a person's slow and deliberate footsteps right there under her window. Cautious steps, trying not to be heard. Jen doesn't dare look out of her window for fear of what could be out there. Instead, she hides and waits for the sound to stop. Eventually it does, but it doesn't trail off, it just stops. Was someone still out there, being as still as could be? Then my grandma comes home and Jen is obviously frightened. She tells my grandma what happened. I consider my grandma to be a brave lady, so she checks throughout the house and then looks out the windows. Nothing. Not too much cause for concern, it could have been anything. So, time for dishes. My grandma's washing dishes in the kitchen, which is on the left side of the house. There's a window directly above the sink. Evening hasn't quite turned into nighttime yet, and the sun is still lingering as it tends to do in the summer. And over the sound of the running water, my grandma hears something that she can still imitate to this day, a heavy, raspy heaving. It seems to be coming from below the window outside. Imagine a long-term smoker gasping for air, a deep and frightening sound. 2 and 2 are put together, and there has been someone outside for quite some time. There was someone there while she was away at the store, and that someone must have been there when she checked around the house. Someone she didn't see. Then a fear sets in, and before this sound can stop, Brandy, whose pen is about 30 feet from the kitchen window, goes crazy, barking like she never has before. And like I said, my grandma is a brave lady. She decides to go get Brandy. She advises Jen to lock the door after she steps outside, and for Jen to only open it when she sees her mother returning, running back up the stairs with Brandy on a leash. So on the count of 3, she makes a run for it. Jen locks the door and waits there for what seems to be like an eternity. Around the corner comes my grandma with Brandy, bolting up the back steps. The second Jen lets them in the house, she slams the door behind them and locks it. Without missing a beat, the three of them retreat to my grandmother's bedroom, which is located on the back right side of the house. Then, before Grandma even has a chance to gather her thoughts or call someone, there are voices coming from the side street out of her bedroom window. A relief rushes over both of them as they realize that these are familiar voices. My father and his high school buddies, Jeff, Drew, Mark, Chuck, and 5 or 6 teenagers altogether, crammed in a small VW, laughing and joking, obviously drinking and having a good time, in, of all places, right under his mother's nose. However, the voices quickly turned panicked, shouting, "Oh my God, what is that? Oh my God, now there's 4 of them!" And that's what my grandma and my Aunt Jen hear coming from the car. After a couple of minutes, the shouting is directed from the sky to the left side of the house, the front left, outside of Jen's bedroom. Clearly, it's something much more frightening than what they had seen in the sky. As their shouting gets louder and much more panicked, someone yells, "Let's get the hell out of here!" With that, tires squeal as the car full of teenagers bullets forward, making a sharp right turn and tears down the long open road ahead. My grandma stands frozen at the window, watching them as they grow further and further away from the house, away from whatever horrifying sight they saw. Something horrifying was outside her house. Then, unexpectedly, she saw a blur of bright red brake lights glaring in the distance. The car full of boys had stopped, but what for? It was a road surrounded by woods on both sides. Why would they make a stop in a wooded area after being so scared? Then she realized they were making a U-turn, heading back towards the house. In a desperate attempt to signal to the boys to pull into the driveway and come into the house, Grandma runs to the front door and begins to flicker the outside light switch on and off. The car's speeding by so fast, she wonders if they'll even notice the signal. But at the last second, the car makes a quick turn into the driveway. Doors fly open and 6 boys emerge in a massive sprint across the lawn, all 6 of them reaching the front door at the very same second, climbing under and over around my grandma. And then someone pulls her inside along with them. They slam the door, shut, lock, and bolt it, and all of them, out of breath, shaken to the core, each telling their story over one another. Then, above the power lines, it was a ball of light. It was spinning very fast, spinning until the yellow ball turned red hot, then it splits into 2 separate balls, then 4, then the bottom right one spins until red again, until the 4 join back into 1. They weren't sure how long they watched this pattern go on. It seemed so surreal to them. They continued. "Then I said, 'Look at that,'" said Jeff. "And now we see leaning against the house a figure," Mark chimed in. And from all of their accounts, something was very not right with this figure. Imagine a silhouette of a man, not darkened beneath the shadows of night. No, this figure was bright white, all white, from head to toe. Was the man's skin white, or was he wearing white clothing that covered his head like a hood? They couldn't quite tell. They say it seemed to be standing and leaning against the wall of the house very casually, almost as if observing their reactions to the globes above and their patterns when they hovered in the sky not very far from the man's position at the corner of the house, the man in the white suit. Then Jeff says, "I started to yell at the guy, but Drew floored it and we peeled out. Then we're coming back towards the house," George said, "and we see the lights flashing. We thought the lights in the sky were making electricity flicker in the house, but someone yells, 'It's your mom!' And they realized my grandma was flicking the lights to get their attention, and they knew they couldn't just leave her there and my aunt there alone. So they stormed the house. My dad and his friends aren't sure if the lights in the sky or the man in white were still there or not, or when they ran for the door. They were so panicked and focused on getting inside, no one really looked. Nor do I think they wanted to. My grandma opens the front door and she's met with the group of teenagers bursting through the doorway all which ways. One friend goes through my grandma's legs just to get inside the house a split second sooner. Then the story ends pretty anticlimactically. My grandma told the boys that they could party as much as they wanted in the basement, and she'd cook them a big lasagna dinner as long as they promised not to leave the house. But first, she calls the police and tells them about the crunching and the rasping sounds and the dog barking. She doesn't want to tell them the other details because she doesn't want them to question George and his friends who had been drinking underage and illegally. So 2 police cars pull into the driveway. The boys sit quietly out of sight while my grandma speaks to the police. Then there's a knock on the front door. It's one of the policemen. "We searched the entire yard, around the house, in and around the shed, along the row of trees and bushes outside the perimeter of the house and the yard, and we don't see anything. But if you should hear anything further, just give us a call back." And like I said, we'll never know exactly what it was that happened that night. But the story spread quickly and became a legend in Wall Township. Years later, when I was a little kid, my dad and I were watching a show on UFO sightings together. They showed a film someone had taken of UFOs spinning balls of light into the sky. My father jumped out of his seat and yelled, "That's it! That's what I saw!" The film was taped in another city. I don't recall where, perhaps even out of the country. Unfortunately, it was a quick clip and we were unable to tape it. All I can say is the man in the white suit and the glowing spinning balls of light in the sky that visited my family's house in 1987 continues to intrigue me, and inspires me to keep an eye on the sky and to share the story with others. Next story. My grandma died of brain cancer about 20 years ago. About 2 weeks after she died, I was hanging out over at my parents' place and my mom got a phone call. No number, no unknown number, just blank caller ID. She answered it, got quiet, hung up, and went to her room without saying anything. When I finally got her to talk about it, she said it was her mother, saying she was trapped and please come get her because they wouldn't let her leave over and over again. And then the phone disconnected. I asked her about it a few years ago and she denied that it happened for a bit and then admitted that it had happened 2 more times that year and then stopped, but she didn't want to discuss it anymore. Next story. When I was very young, we lived in a house that had the usual ghost activity, hearing footsteps, hushed voices in the next room, etc. But the really cool thing was the basement door. It would open on its own. I'm not talking about an inch or two when you closed another door nearby. I mean, it would swing fully open like someone was walking through it. My parents tried locking the door and it would still swing open on its own. By the time I was learning to walk, my dad was concerned I would fall down the steps, so he went down into the basement and just said to no one in particular that he had a young daughter upstairs and if they could please be careful with that door. Ever since then, the basement door would open and then slowly shut on its own. You know, I've been meaning to mention this. I've recorded a few of these ghost and supernatural stories recently for the channel. I don't know what order they'll be uploaded in, but sometimes just talk to the ghost. You know what I mean? Be friendly. The power of asking works with even the undead. Come to think of it, in The Walking Dead, why didn't Rick just try to negotiate with the walkers? Is he stupid? I don't know. Anyway, next story. So I've had a few, and I'm not sure what's real or what's my brain playing tricks. I've heard footsteps in the attic a couple of times in my parents' house, and it's a 3-story Victorian house, so I doubt a squatter. Plus, the only door up there has a bolt lock on the outside, which I checked each time and it was still bolted. The worst thing about that is that it happened during the day while I was all alone. This was in the middle of the day. Unlike most of these stories where it's always night, I was in my room playing on my computer when I heard the doorknob rattle. No big deal, my cats F with it sometimes, but then it rattles again, but really hard, way harder than the cat can do it. Oh yeah, and I noticed the cat is already sleeping on my bed. So I say, hello, thinking it may be someone from my family in their home looking for me, but instead I get a big bump on the door, like someone shouldering into it. By the way, I don't have the door locked. If someone wanted, they could have just turned the doorknob. But okay, that thump was freaky and it's followed by another thump. Now I'm freaked out and I'm saying, what the F, as the words leave my mouth, but now there's this huge thump at the door, enough to make my room shake a bit and scare the cat. Now I'm sitting freaked the F out waiting for something to burst through, and I'm kind of wondering if it was an earthquake. And even though I lived somewhere there were never earthquakes, then after a minute of staring at the door, I open it and see nothing. I check out the house and no one is there and all of the doors are still locked, no windows broken or any signs of a break-in. I go back to my room still a little freaked out, and when I closed the door, the knob fell off in my hand. It wasn't even loose before. No idea what that was, and it never happened again, but it's the strangest, possibly paranormal thing I've ever seen. Next story. I was working a night shift at a call center, and it was a slow night, so I was watching Netflix or YouTube or something. We have a camera that looks at the back door, and I saw someone walking down the hall towards where I am working. Didn't recognize him, but not wanting to get in crap, I quickly closed Netflix/YouTube. A couple of minutes go by, and I don't see anyone. But I noticed a door had shut that usually stays open, so I go and open it back up. I still don't see anyone in the office, so I do a check of the entire building, and nobody is around. Then I get back to work, data entry, and I wait for my shift to end for the other people to come in, thinking someone might have popped up behind me any second. Next shift comes in and I tell my manager, and they give me a look like I'm crazy, and then I leave. Next night I get to work and they tell me they checked over the recording. At basically the moment I saw someone walk in, the video froze on a single frame for about 30 minutes. The video starts up again just as the door closes, and shortly after I go open it again. I should add, it's one of those magnetic fire doors that would close if the power went out. Anyways, I was freaked out for the entire night shift next time. Next story. My first apartment after college was the upper half of an old house. My new roommate had just recently graduated, so he was in no rush to move in. I'd been living with my parents for the past year or so and needed out as soon as possible. So I brought a sleeping bag over with my last load of stuff on day one. No utilities, just camping out by myself in the living room. At some point during the night, I had a vivid dream that a killer with a knife was coming down the main hall towards the door to the living room. Just as he was about to open the door, I woke up terrified. I shook it off, and then I went back to sleep. Then I was talking to my roommate one morning a few months later, and he told me about a weird dream that he had the previous night. Seems he had fallen asleep in the living room for the first time and had a dream that a killer with a knife was coming down the main hall towards towards the door to the living room. Just as the killer was about to open the door, my friend woke up. He spent the rest of the night in his own room, and I told him about my dream from the first night, and we both thought it was weird. Then a couple of months later, a friend needed a place to crash, asked to stay on the couch for a night. Next morning, he mentions that he had an odd dream, so I asked him, was it a killer with a knife who was coming down the main hall towards the door to the living room? And then my roommate adds, was he just about to open the door and then you woke up? And the look of pure terror on our friend's face is astounding. Next story. I worked in a really old movie theater for my first job. It was a small theater, 6 screens, and all in a line so you could see from one end of the building to the other, essentially. Eventually, I got promoted to manager, so I had to start the movies. We had film still, so it was a fairly complicated process of threading the projectors and then watching over them because they F up easily. We always joked about ghosts and a lot of weird crap happening around there, like things falling over, doors shutting, and hearing voices. Well, one day, I was there with like one other employee, slow midweek day, and I walked out of the office up in the projection booth and out of habit looked both ways, you know, the old left right thing, and to my right was a woman in a whitish dress and brown hair about 4 feet away just standing there. I only caught a glimpse before doing a double take and she was gone. I wasn't the only person to see her though. Several other employees claim that they've seen a similar woman around the theater, but I never saw her again, so I'm not sure if I just imagined seeing a person or if I did see a person. Stupid ghosts. Next story. I am a totally materialistic person and have never experienced anything paranormal in my life, except one thing that I can't explain. When I was a kid, I had a huge wart on my foot. My parents took me to the hospital and doctors tried to burn it out or something, but it didn't work and the wart came back even bigger. Then summer came and I went to my granny to a small Russian village. She saw my wart and called for a woman known as a local healer. She took a thread and started making knots over the wart, whispering something to herself. And in just a week, the wart was gone. I learned that this is a traditional and renowned way for healing warts in remote places in Russia, but I have zero explanation for how it's possible. Next story. My brother reminded me of this the other day, actually. When we were growing up, we were best friends with a brother and sister pair who were our exact ages, so we spent all of our time with them and at their house. Their house was big. It even had a movie theater in the basement. My brother and I slept over often, and the 4 of us actually slept in the basement in the theater since it had a huge sunken couch that fit all of us. Around the time I was about 9 or so, and brother was older so he remembers it better, our friends were really excited to have us over because they had gotten a few couch cushions in the crawl room so it would be like camping. Brother and I both had no idea what they meant, but we knew every inch of their house, so we went to see this room. In their basement, around the corner from the theater, there was a short door, so short that we had to crawl through to get in. Brother and I had never seen this door before, even though we had practically grown up in this house. We questioned it, but neither of us remember the answer they gave other than they just found it. They were so rich, so I guess we assumed it was new construction? Anyway, we slept on couch cushions in that short room that night, and neither my brother or I can remember anything remarkable about it, and we slept in the theater again after that night. But the remarkable thing happened a few years later. It was my friend's 14th or so birthday, and I was keeping her busy while her brother was hiding her present, presumably in the crawl room. At the end of her birthday party, he brought up the crawl room, and he said something like, "You remember going in and out of there a few times, right?" And I said yes. He looked confused and asked me to show him where I remember the door being. We go into the basement, and lo and behold, there is no door. Not even an outline where it would have been sealed. My brother kicks the wall and it's solid cement. We ask our friend's parents and they have no idea. They've never done construction down there and there is no other room other than the theater in the basement. But Reddit, let me tell you, I was in this room in the basement. All night, we sat on cushions in there and brought a small TV with Nintendo. We went in and out for a solid night. We all remember it. After our friends moved, the new neighbors had us over and my brother and I went into the basement with fresh eyes of logical adults. Still nothing. No door, and we realized that there would have been virtually no room for us to sit comfortably because the basement only extends about 4 feet past the edge of the house. The room would have been under our friend's lawn. I know it's not an outright scary story, but I think it falls under the category of paranormal because it's just baffling. Next story. My grandma's house is chock full of weird stories going way back. Pretty much everything weird and scary has happened in the hallway leading to the spare bedroom. My grandma would see my grandpa's silhouette walking down the hall. He'd stop at the door to their bedroom and peer in, and she'd ask if he needed something. He wouldn't answer and would keep walking. Peeved, she would get up to go ask him again, only to find him in the living room sleeping or watching TV and insisting he'd been there the whole time. Then my mom has heard someone calling her name from the same hallway, and once we were there alone house sitting while my grandparents were out of town, they were due back late that night, and my mom and I both both heard heavy footsteps coming from the hall. She told me they must have come home early, so she went to greet them. No one there. Then, guest room at the end of the same hall has a TV that will turn on by itself. They also had a couple stay there, and neither one was particularly superstitious. But the next morning, the husband was unusually quiet. He finally got a chance to talk to my grandma alone and said very simply, "Someone was watching us last night." He had seen a figure standing in the corner of the room staring at them, and had been so frightened that he had just closed his eyes and tried to go back to sleep. When my grandma pressed for details, he kinda shrugged it off and didn't want to talk about it anymore. There's also a middle bedroom between the spare room and my grandparents' room, which we have always just referred to as my room because I used to stay with them so often. One time, I was on my bed when I heard a thump and then a skittering noise like something had jumped off the bed and was running across the floor. I thought it was the cat being weird, so I sat up to see what she was doing, only to find that the cat was at the foot of the bed, staring intently at the doorway to the hallway. I looked around for a bit, but was unable to find anything. So yeah, Grandma's house is super haunted by shadow people. Next story. When I was much younger, I was sitting with my cousin in our grandparents' kitchen talking when I saw a white cat walk from the basement into the bathroom. My cousin, who'd been spinning around in her swivel chair, turned back to face me. Absolutely shocked, I said, "Did you see that?"
The cat?
Yeah. We got up and checked the bathroom, but there was nothing there. The basement door had been closed and latched the whole time. I always try to think of an explanation, but I can't. Next story. Back in my late teens, I was teaching myself to read tarot cards, so I would do free readings for friends and family all the time for the practice. So I'm at a family barbecue at my boyfriend's house, and we're all hanging out and chilling when they ask me to go get my cards. So I do a fairly boring reading for my boyfriend's mom, and my boyfriend's sister-in-law decides she wants to be next. So I shift over to be across the table from her and set her to shuffling the cards. I throw the cards in standard Celtic cross layout, and it was the darkest spread I've ever seen in my life. Almost all major arcana cards all showing their more negative aspects. So I'm sitting there looking at these cards that are basically saying, this person is not good, and my brain is going a mile a minute trying to figure out what the hell I'm looking at. Then a deep, wolfish male voice I've never heard before or since says right next to my ear, "Tell her nothing." Not threatening, just giving very clear instruction. I told her I couldn't tell her anything, so I gathered up the cards and got out of there like my butt was on fire. Then, a few weeks later, I'm over there again and it came up. I've never told him about the voice. Turns out she had 2 palmists and 3 astrologers react the same way to divination requests. Okay, that woman's soul is cursed, haunted, she is bound for murder, maybe she doesn't like undersparked, I don't know, but something is off with her. I'm not really big on the whole tarot card things, but you had 2 palmists and 3 astrologers react the same way to divination requests? What? That woman is 1 heartbreak, 1 broken nail, 1 bad day away from being the next Mussolini. I don't know, but that woman, I don't know. Somebody put her on a list. We need to do Minority Report, but for people who project dark auras. Anyway, next story. So I've told this story before, but it has always been buried in previous threads. I'll tell it again and type it out as to earn my points the good honest way rather than cutting and pasting. It's long, but I wager worth the read. So, several years ago when I was in my mid-20s, I accepted a job as a visitor services manager at a medium-sized historic house museum. The house was a Victorian Gothic cottage of an author who wrote a single rather important book and then rode that fame for many more less successful and equally poor written publications on various topics. Anyway, the house was beautiful but dark and oppressive in that perfectly creepy manner that only Victorian homes can be. It sat near the street with 2 other buildings, a carriage house, and another mansion behind. All belonged to my non-profit employer. My house was tucked in the front corner of the ground floor of the carriage house. In the daytime, it was filled with sunlight and faced the perfectly manicured cottage gardens, but at nighttime, it was dark and gloomy, and the position of the desk put my back towards the expanse of the quiet, empty, 100-some-year-old building. It was eerie on the best of days and terrifying on several of the worst, and this dreary March day happened to be the very worst. It had been an exceptionally boring day, as most were, working at an ill-attended museum. All told, I think we'd sent a total of 1 tour with 1 visitor and their disinterested college student tour guide throughout the house. As for me, I had spent most of the day staring longingly at Googled pictures of Robert Pattinson on the computer behind the front desk. As I said, this was a while ago, my tastes have improved. But it was before the clocks sprung forward for the season, so it was nearing dark before closing, and the deep cloud cover and persistent drizzle didn't improve the ambient lighting. Seated at the front desk in the poorly stocked gift shop, I sent my 2 remaining tour guides in to close the house for the night, which involved switching off lights, switching others on, shutting some doors, and opening yet others, apparently all to ensure the house burned in a particular manner where that a blaze took it in the nighttime, or to set up some specifically encouraged path for robbers who managed to ninja sneak past the security system to steal tired velvet upholstered CDs and ugly faded lithographs. Anyhow, the 2 tour guides were in the house, and I was stationed at the front desk on the main floor of the 1872 carriage house. Directly above me was a lofty attic space used as merchandise and junk storage of the type that only museums seem to accumulate, because everyone should save the posters from the 1994 mother-daughter tea fundraiser, just in case. And above me, and to the right, was the guide break room, complete with crappy folding tables and chairs, a microwave, and multiple boxes and crates of books, educational material, and related stuff. Downstairs in the gift shop on my desk was an old handset landline phone that could dial out, but could also, with the press of an aptly labeled guide room button, reach the room above on speakerphone, so that I might call up and announce a pending tour, or yell at them, or sing, though I don't think I ever did sing to the guides up there. But I was just finishing up considering what color Robert Pattinson's eyes might be in candlelight when I started to hear the most considerable racket coming from the guide break room. It sounded very much like a person of considerable girth lifting heavy objects and carrying them to the other side of the room, and then unceremoniously dumping them out, stomping the entire time. This continued for perhaps 30 seconds, and I recall the thought that drifted upon through my confusion and irritation was, that sounds urgent, as if the person was doing whatever it was they were, and they were doing it as fast as possible. Anyway, I was pissed, and no one should have been up there anyway. So I called on speakerphone and said something like, "What the hell are you doing?" And no one answered. So I went with the classic fallback of, "Hello? Hello? Hello?" And then my voice died in my throat as I listened. I could hear him, her, it moving clearly through the speakerphone, picking things up, shoving things, dropping things. Then I heard it come up to the desk where the phone sat. I could hear it breathing hard and moving things on the desk, papers, maybe even the phone base. It was at that moment that I realized that not only had I seen both my tour guides leave to close the adjacent house, confirming that I was indeed alone in the building, but that I could see all unlocked doors from my seat, and no one had come in since their departure. The hair stood up on my arms, and I immediately radioed our aged but well-meaning security guard who happened to be standing just outside the front door of the carriage house in the misty yuckiness of the evening. God knows why he wasn't inside where it was much warmer, but he went straight upstairs upon my call, and I watched him march up the first set of stairs and then listened as he turned at the landing and walked up the last handful tentatively. I held my breath, waiting for him to open the door, and then heard no more sounds. "Rod? What's up there? Rod, who's up there?" But there was no one. He came back downstairs looking at me a bit owlishly as I had insisted there was someone up there. The room had been empty and nothing had been touched, save a pile of freshly crumpled paper in the center of the table. At this point, my guides, having heard the ruckus on the radio, returned from closing the house. They swore up and down that when they had left, nothing had been amiss, that they had not crumpled the paper. There had been a stack of new neat papers on the center of the table when they had gone up to close. And I won't lie, I was shaken by it. I grew up in old houses and have worked in the historical field my entire adult life, so I've encountered a few odd and inexplainable things over the years. But this was much scarier. After we had finished closing up the visitor center for the day, I knew I would be returning to an empty house, and that thought was too much to bear. I instead sat in the parking lot of the local grocery store until my husband finished work. I have no idea what I heard up in that room, who walked up to the phone and was so frantically moving unseen objects, but I know with absolute certainty that it was not good and that it was angry. The oral history that had passed down from guide to guide for generations of museum employees spoke of a young man, a stable hand who had taken his own life in the building at the end of the 19th century. But most museums have a story like that, and it's likely not true. Whatever this was, I sincerely hope I don't meet it again. Ladies and gentlemen, it's always the stable boys, isn't it? Always in the romance novels, getting up to no good or haunting people, I guess now. As for this particular story, though, when you tell stories, there's such thing as concise storytelling and getting to the point. That's just the thing to consider sometimes. You don't have to give every detail, like Robert Pattinson's eyes. He's dreamy, I know, but, get on with it. Anyway, next story. So, my sister and I go on road trips every year and try to stay in haunted locations. Most places don't seem to be haunted at all, but there are two places that had some weird stuff happen. 1. Garden House B&B in Hannibal, Missouri. I take a journal with me and write a summary of each day right before I go to sleep. Apparently, sometime in the night/early morning, I wrote a paragraph about having terrible nightmares and that I think something was in our room. I do not remember writing this at all. And 2. Prospect Place in Trinway, Ohio. My sister and I are the only people there in this big old house. I went to sleep, but my sister stayed up a little longer. Sometime after midnight, my sister was standing next to my bed, nearly incoherent, frantically whispering that she had heard someone throw a marble outside the bedroom door. I was either too tired or too scared, likely a combination of both, to go and check. But we left as soon as the sun came up that morning. Next story. So, 8-year-old me lying awake in bed. It's after midnight. The rest of the family are already sleeping in their rooms. Suddenly, I'm hearing what sounds like every window downstairs being banged on, and that every pot and pan in the kitchen are being thrown around and banged on each other like someone playing the cymbals would do. I also experienced what I strongly believe what is called a residual haunting, an event that happened in real life that is played over and over again like a recording long after the event in real life has passed. Again, I'm wide awake sometime after midnight. I'm a midnight owl, and my bedroom window is open, so I heard things clearly. Heard a car coming up the road, heard it stop, then I heard a door opening and the voice of a little girl say, "Bye, Daddy," in a cheerful see you later tone. Car door slams shut and the car immediately peels out like it couldn't wait to go. Tires are screeching. Not 2 seconds later, I hear that little girl scream. It was the most horrific scream I've ever personally heard, even to this day. Of course, I was on my feet and looking out my window to see what the F was happening, and guess what I saw? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. All is quiet now. Dead quiet. There was no way that little girl could have hidden in the time it took for me to get to my window. There wasn't even anywhere for her to hide in or behind of. My house stood on a hill. The house across the street stood on a hill. There were no bushes she could hide in, as I lived in a place of deserts and canyons. Plus, it was dry as crap out there. Any small movement would have been heard. Next story. You guys know what shadow people are, right? The name kind of gives it away. They're shadows and also people, like a silhouette. You get the idea. Anyway, this was back when I was 10, maybe 11 years old. I'm over at a friend's place and we go out back in the forest behind his house. We walk through some tall brush. When out of the corner of my eye, I see what looks like the silhouette of a head and shoulders rise over the brush. I ignore it, thinking I was just seeing things. A short while later, we're out on a wide trail when something darts across the path in front of us. It looked like the silhouette of a man hunched over, running from one side to the other, somehow leaving the plants on either side perfectly intact. My friend turns and goes to me, "Holy crap, did you see that?" I did, and we got out of that forest as fast as we could. We sat in his house terrified, and I mentioned the head and shoulders I initially saw. Turns out he saw them too and just ignored them like I did. What we saw still freaks me out to this day, nearly 10 years later, because we never really knew what we saw. Next story. My freshman year of college, I bought an Ouija board. I had one through high school and always had really awesome experiences with it. I went down to the woods with 3 of my friends and we started. 15 minutes into crap was getting scary and none of our phones were working. The dial was darting across the board and one of the guys I was with started recording with his phone. A minute after he started recording, the board flew up with no intervention of any of us about 4 feet in the air and slammed down. I burst out into tears, ran towards the school, and all of my friends followed. I was handed the board and someone else had the box. And I went to go put the board in the box and it was yanked out of my hands by whatever spirit girl we were talking to. No one has ever really believed that story besides the people I was with. But I don't really care because I know that it happened. I haven't touched a board since and never will. Well, folks, we have heard all the spooky, scary skeleton stories. Feel free to share yours in the comment section below. And I'm always reading the comments because I love you all so much. But thank you everyone for watching the video. Have a good one. Thanks for commenting and bye.